Home is where a child should feel safest. Kol Page was 4 years old. He should have been playing with his siblings, watching cartoons and getting excited about starting primary school in September. Instead, in June 2024, he died in hospital 2 years after suffering catastrophic injuries at the hands of his mother and her boyfriend. His short life was punctuated by a brutal campaign of violence that his caregivers tried to blame on Kol himself. On the 25th of April 2022, an ambulance was called to the house of Kol's mother, Zoe Coutts, in Bromley.
Please, he's not leaving. I don't know what to do. No, there's nothing here, please, but he's dead.
She said he had been unwell overnight with vomiting, that he'd fallen out of his high chair and had now stopped breathing.
By the time police arrived, the story would change for the first of many times.
And Kol Page was found there with some quite significant injuries and since subsequently been taken to hospital.
According to Zoe, Kol had been perfectly fine that morning, and when she went to get a snack, she'd returned to find him unconscious.
Paramedics found Kol in cardiac arrest with bruising on his face, chest and abdomen. He was rushed to hospital where the full extent of his injuries would begin to unravel.
He had catastrophic internal injuries. His bowel had been torn. He had lost a life-threatening amount of blood. These injuries could only have been caused deliberately by a punch, kick or stamp. Although Kol survived, he was left with devastating brain damage.
Our investigation was about one central question: how a 2-year-old child came to suffer fatal injuries inside his own home and who was responsible. When we began looking back at Kol's life in the weeks before the morning he was violently assaulted, we could see that what happened on the 25th of April didn't come out of nowhere.
Kol had suffered multiple injuries in the weeks leading up to that day. Bruises to his face, black eyes, missing hair. The injuries were seen by family members, friends and professionals. Each time they were noticed, the explanation was the same.
What's happened is because of the way Kol is and stuff. He's always hurting himself and he's very clumsy.
Okay.
And that's what I think has happened.
Okay,
yeah.
Elaborate on that. Tell me a bit more about that.
So just like since I've known them, like he's just crazy. He's always running around and climbing over things and jumping off stuff.
What are you trying to insinuate? He climbs over furniture, is what you've told us. All right.
He climbs up on dining room chairs. He jumps on the sofa.
How does it? Does he hurt himself?
He has done.
He has done. Tell me about that.
I've told you, he's clumsy. He's fallen off dinner chairs before. He's fallen off the sofa.
When we placed those explanations alongside expert medical evidence, they simply didn't hold up. Doctors told us that many of Kol's injuries were not consistent with accidents. They were consistent with force, and they were happening repeatedly.
At the time, Kol lived with his mother, Zoe Coutts, who had a new partner, Scott O'Connor. Scott O'Connor was not an occasional visitor. Mobile phone data showed us how often he was at the address, how frequently he stayed overnight and how closely he was in daily life inside that home. As investigators, we don't just look at isolated incidents, we look at patterns. And what emerged here was a pattern of escalating harm. One of the most important pieces of evidence in this case came from the defendant's own phones.
We recovered messages between Zoe Coutts and Scott O'Connor that showed their attitudes towards Kol, particularly when he was upset or struggling to sleep.
By the time those messages were sent, Kol already had a history of unexplained injuries. So when we later established that he was violently assaulted in the early hours of the 25th of April, those messages took on a very different meaning. They showed that violence wasn't being challenged, it was being accepted.
On the night of the 24th into the 25th of April, Kol was unwell. He had been vomiting. Scott O'Connor had been drinking heavily. Both adults were present in the home. Medical experts later told the court that Kol had suffered a severe blow or blows to his abdomen in the early hours of that morning. That injury would have caused extreme pain and internal bleeding.
What shocked us as investigators was what the phone data showed next. Messages were being sent, conversations were continuing, plans were being discussed. We know that during that same period when phones were active and normal, conversations were ongoing. Kol had already suffered the injuries that would ultimately kill him. That context mattered enormously to the investigation. Despite the severity of those injuries, no one sought medical help during the night, no ambulance was called, no emergency assistance was requested. That delay is critical to understanding what happened next.
No, he's 2 years old. There's nothing here, please, but he's dead.
When Kol stopped breathing that morning, it was the final consequence of injuries inflicted hours earlier. What's also significant is how that call came about. It wasn't instinct, it wasn't immediate action. A friend had to tell Zoe Coutts to stop talking and call an ambulance. By the time paramedics arrived, Kol was in cardiac arrest. Kol had no pulse when he arrived at A&E and doctors discovered catastrophic internal injuries. His bowel had been torn and he had lost a life-threatening amount of blood.
Experts told us those injuries could only have been caused by significant force, a punch, a kick or a stamp.
Sick yesterday.
What,
I didn't see him yesterday.
was he seen by a doctor at all? Or
No, I was going to take him this morning.
this morning? Okay.
I was just being faced. It's not fair. It's my baby. I do everything for my children.
Kol survived that day, but the damage was irreversible. Not only did Kol never fully recover, but he was left with catastrophic brain damage and severe disability for the rest of his life. And in June 2024, Kol Page died as a result of the injuries inflicted on him when he was just 2 years old.
When we spoke to Zoe Coutts and Scott O'Connor, both denied harming Kol. They repeated the same explanation, that he was clumsy.
He's clumsy. He's fallen off dinner chairs.
But by this point, Kol had already suffered injuries so severe that doctors told us they could only have been caused deliberately. They didn't accuse each other, they didn't raise concerns, and they didn't tell the truth. Instead, they protected each other.
Were you also in the bedroom? Were you in one of the children's rooms? Were you downstairs?
I love them, like they love me. They always tell me they love me and stuff. So yeah, I thought I was never going to be their dad, but I'll be there, someone there for them.
Our investigation brought together medical evidence, phone data, photographs, witness accounts and expert analysis. Piece by piece, we built the timeline.
From the repeated injuries to the messages, to the delay in seeking help. And what that timeline showed was clear. Kol was subjected to repeated harm, that harm escalated, and the two adults responsible either caused it or allowed it to happen.
A jury heard all that evidence. They found Zoe Coutts and Scott O'Connor guilty.
From the moment Kol was assaulted in the early hours of the morning, the outcome for him was irreversible. What the investigation did was make sure the truth of that morning was finally known.
Kol didn't have a voice. He depended on the adults around him to protect him.
They didn't. Our job was to speak for him and to make sure justice was done. If you're worried about a child, trust your instincts, speak up. It could save a life.